Back then, there was a crow's nest on the ship, a small platform at a height which could be called a lookout point. Someone is made to sit atop it so that they can keep watch on the track of the ship to look out for traffic or obstructions. Ships used to have crow's nests with 1 or 2 lookouts. 2 watchkeepers were stationed at the Titanic's crow's nest. The person sitting here has to face very low temperatures. The cold winds were blowing at a very fast pace. Moreover, it was nighttime. The cold winds make the eyes tear up, which makes it difficult to see. One of them was Fred Fleet. Fred Fleet happened to see something in close vicinity to the ship. A black mass of sorts silhouetted against the stars. When the ship inched closer, Fleet realized that it may be a dark iceberg. The waves were calm. There wasn't any crashing. He immediately warned the bridge, saying, "Iceberg, dead ahead," meaning right close to the ship. 000 degrees ahead, speaking relatively. The iceberg right ahead. The duty officer gave a hard-to-port order, but the ship was going at around 23 knots. Around 23 knots, it was a fast-moving ship. Iceberg, right ahead. When he took that hard-to-port action, the iceberg ended up on the ship's starboard side, but the distance was nearly 400 to 450 meters when the iceberg was spotted. For a ship this big, this distance is very small. Fred rang the bell thrice quickly so that the people below could be alerted, then picked up the phone and called the officers on the bridge. He screams that there was an iceberg in front of them and that the ship should be steered immediately. First Officer William heard this message and signaled the engine room that the ship should be steered in the left direction, but unfortunately, it was too late. The ship dragged against the iceberg, and considering it was 1912 when that occurred, welding was still at its developing stages. It wasn't durable because it wasn't that advanced. Back then, rivets were used to construct ships. The same rivets gave out, and 5 compartments started to flood. This iceberg was not a small one. It was 200 by 400 feet in length, as big as a football field, and was so high that it was matching the crow's nest in height. Scientists estimate that the iceberg weighed as much 1.5 million tons. Titanic's front, right side collided with the iceberg, specifically near the bow. Now, what is the bow? You can see in this picture that the part right at the front is the bow. The part above the bow is called the stern, and the protruded part below is called the keel. For around 10 seconds, the ship grazed against the iceberg, and a huge dent was formed. Due to this, small holes formed in the main body of the ship. Captain Edward J. Smith got up at 11:48 p.m. and got to the ship's bridge. After perusing the ship's situation at the bridge, he stopped the engine and rushed to the bottom. When he got there and saw the flooding, i.e., the 5 compartments flooding rapidly, at that moment, he knew the Titanic was doomed. They were completely shocked upon seeing this. They thought that this ship was unsinkable. At the beginning of the video, I'd mentioned that this ship was considered unsinkable, owing to impressive safety features. There were 2 main safety features which led to this belief. First, this ship had a double-bottom hull. The main body of the ship is called a hull. A double-bottomed hull would mean 2 layers. Even if the layer below got damaged, the second layer could save the ship. Second, the hull of the ship was divided into 16 separate watertight compartments. Even if 4 out of 16 compartments were filled with water, the ship would still sail. It would make no difference to the ship, but the impact created by the iceberg was on the side of the ship. The double-bottom hull proved to be of no use. The sides only had 1 single layer. Second, the impact was so large that 6 out of 16 watertight compartments were breached. Water was filling in all of them. The limit was 4. The inundation of 6 compartments meant that the ship couldn't be saved from sinking. The unsinkable ship would sink. Around 12, the captain makes it back to the bridge. He knows it's only a matter of 2 hours. Unless the engineers are able to handle the flooding, i.e., expel the water back out. The engineers tried to do their best. They tried to pump the water out of the ship as much as they could, but the situation was still spiraling out of control. At 12:14 a.m., that is after 14 minutes, Captain Smith ordered his radio operator Phillips to call for help. "Tell everyone we're in trouble and we need help. The nearby ships would maybe detect it and come to save them." Senior radio Jack Phillips turns out to be the hero of our story. One after the other, he began sending distress signals. There was no response. He sent another and another. There must be some ship out there that would pick up their distress call 20 minutes later. At 12:20 a.m., there was a ship called RMS Carpathia that was present near the Titanic. It detected the signal. He spoke to the operator of Titanic over radio and directed his ship to move towards Titanic and go save them. The problem was that despite its closeness, this ship was around 100 kilometers away. Even if it moved towards the Titanic at its top speed, it would take 3.5 hours to reach the Titanic. Would the Titanic ship stay put for 3.5 hours? The rest of the crew members lit up flares and rockets in the sky in the hope that a ship nearby would notice them. But unfortunately, apart from the ship Carpathia, there was no response from any other ship. Meanwhile, Captain Smith ordered the evacuation of passengers using the lifeboats on the ship. He knew that the ship's 20 lifeboats wouldn't be enough for all its passengers. Now, the problem in this situation, especially in 1912, and especially on the passenger ships, the passengers never initially understand the gravity of the situation, no matter how hard you try to make them. And because a ship isn't like an aeroplane, a ship doesn't propel downwards as a plane does, it's not going to happen. A ship is a slow-moving target, and at the same time, when a ship sinks, it takes time to do so. It doesn't sink instantly in a matter of 10 minutes. Because a ship has different compartments, even when you try to inform the people of danger, try to make them understand how serious it is, they don't really understand, since a ship takes so long to sink. When the Titanic brushed with that iceberg, the passengers were playing football with the iceberg pieces that ended up on deck. When they were asked to be serious to gather at the lifeboat stations at the port and starboard, they were unwilling to, because none have noticed when the ship collided with the iceberg, because it was only a brush against it, it did not crash against the iceberg. At 12:14 a.m., when Captain Smith asked Phillips to call for help, at the same time, with a very heavy heart, he gave an order to abandon ship. This means that the entirety of the crew and the passengers have to immediately board the lifeboats and take off, but the passengers were reluctant. As per protocol, women and children would be given preference to board the lifeboats. The first lifeboat was lowered onto the water. You can tell how casual the passengers were after learning that out of that lifeboat's 62 seats, 37 seats were actually empty. Despite the duty officers and the crew trying to guide women and children passengers onto the lifeboats, no one was taking them seriously. Some women also refused to leave their husbands behind. So, the whole situation was complicated, you understand that. Despite the first lifeboat being discharged, everyone kept the same attitude until 3 to 4 half-empty lifeboats were discharged. A total of 20 lifeboats were to be lowered, and they didn't have much time. With the passage of time, compartments began to be filled with water, one after the other. the ship began to tilt. Gradually, the passengers realized that the ship could indeed sink. When this realization dawned, there was chaos, and people began to run around in panic. By 1 in the night, so much water had filled the compartments in the front that the bow of the ship had gone underwater. Due to this, the rear part of Titanic surfaced out of the water. The propellers at the back surfaced out of the water. When the ship tilted to this degree, pandemonium reigned. People began to fight with one another for a seat in the lifeboat. The problem was, there was a scarcity of lifeboats on the ship. There were only 20 lifeboats, which could accommodate only 1,200 people, approximately. But there were around 2,200 aboard the ship. When the time came for the rest of the lifeboats to be lowered, people got desperate. They were desperate to get on the lifeboats, but by then, there was no room left. How sad is that? At 1:30 a.m., when the ship started to trim, people started panicking. Notice the time frame the ship starts to trim forward in a bowing position at 1:45 a.m. The ship's crew lowers its last lifeboat. If Captain Smith hadn't lowered those first half-empty lifeboats, how were 20 lifeboats going to be lowered in just 15 minutes? It wasn't possible. It could have been a very big loss. I think he took the right action. How could he have convinced everyone when everyone was so casual about the situation? The willing had to be saved, right? And when the last lifeboat was lowered at 1:45 a.m., 1,500 passengers, including the crew, were still on the Titanic. People started jumping into the water because they thought they could save themselves, but the Northern Atlantic should be avoided at all costs, because there's a condition called hypothermia. If your whole body ends up in ice-cold water, it won't be able to last even a few minutes. You can die of hypothermia. At 1:45 a.m., the ship's generators failed, and all the lights went out. 705 survivors sat waiting in lifeboats in the dark of night in the Atlantic for someone to come and save them. According to survivors and testimonies, when the ship started sinking, when its lights went out, when people started jumping into the water, all that could be heard in the darkness were screams. And only in a matter of minutes, the people who had jumped into the water, a majority of them, passed away. Now, these 705 survivors sitting in their lifeboats look to the sky for help. The end was chaotic. Everybody was crying, praying, trying to get into the few lifeboats that were left. Oh, it was, pretty sad at the end. As per eyewitnesses, the ship broke into two halves at around 2:20 and then slowly began to sink. It did not take even 3 hours for the unsinkable ship to sink. 1,500 people aboard the ship either drowned with the ship or the ones that knew how to swim were killed by hypothermia. The temperature of the water was -2 degrees Celsius. It is said that the captain of the Titanic, Edward Smith, stayed at the wheel until the end and drowned with the ship. Some even believe that he committed suicide by killing himself. At 4:30 a.m., the SS Carpathia came to rescue the survivors. If only the people on board the Titanic and 2 more hours, and had the Titanic not sunk for another 2 hours, most of the passengers and crew could have been saved. If you ask my personal opinion on the reason why the Titanic sank, I think it was the fate of the Titanic. No one did anything wrong. The actions the duty officer took at the bridge were well reasoned. The lookout stationed at the crow's nest also did the right thing, informing about the iceberg. If we place our estimations, the iceberg the Titanic's crew spotted must have weighed around 270,000 tons. The shipwreck was heavily looked for. Attempts were made to find it. But once a ship sinks, it gets swept away via water currents, hence it's hard to find. However, in 1985, the shipwreck was finally found. The ship's front, bow, since it broke into two when it sank, was found 2.5 miles away from its back, stern. Right in the middle was debris, i.e. plates, people's shoes, no bodies though, they were all decomposed. There's no chance of finding skeletons either. Nothing lasts underwater. Shoes and clothes get left behind, plates, spoons and whatnot, but nothing else really lasts under the sea. One more thing of note, the Titanic isn't the only ship that has sunk in these waters. Many ships have been lost and destroyed at sea. In fact, far too many. The reason why the Titanic is so important is that many lives were lost. 1,500 people lost their lives, so it was a big loss of life. After the disaster of the Titanic, questions were raised. Many controversies took birth, investigations were conducted, and some unknown facts surfaced that shocked everyone. How would it feel if I say that there was another ship 37 kilometers away from Titanic that night, which could make it in time to save the passengers of the Titanic? It is true. The ship was SS Californian. 1 hour before the Titanic hit the iceberg, the last iceberg warning was issued by SS Californian. They had warned, "Watch out, there are a lot of icebergs in the ocean here." After that, at 11:15, the radio operator on the Californian ship had switched off the radio. The Californian ship had stopped for the night and was not moving ahead, keeping the danger in mind. Since the ship had stopped for the night and the radio was off, it did not receive the distress signal. The ship was so close to the Titanic that the passengers on the deck of the Titanic could see the ship on the horizon. When the officers were boarding the passengers in the Titanic, one officer even remarked that he could see a ship in the distance and that it would come save them soon, and so there was no need to worry. But this Californian ship did not come even when rockets and flares were lit up. It is reported that after 12 a.m., the crew members on the Californian ship had actually seen the rockets fired from Titanic. They had even informed their captain Stanley Lord, but the captain insisted that it was no distress signal. Rather, the rich men on Titanic who were partying had Captain Lord of the Californian ship taken the rockets and flares seriously that night. So many people aboard the Titanic could have been saved. Next morning, when they switched their radio on, they received the SOS calls from Titanic. They reached the site, but it was too late by then. They only saw dead bodies floating in the water. Both the inquiries that were conducted in this matter put the blame on Captain Lord of the Californian. But one single man cannot be blamed for such a huge disaster. Other people were responsible as well. Like the lifeboat example I mentioned, there were not a sufficient number of lifeboats because the company that made the ship thought it was unsinkable and the lifeboats were unnecessary. British inquiry also found that Titanic was issued so many iceberg warnings and to proceed with caution, but despite that, the ship was sailing at full speed. Why was that? Why did the captain not slow down? There are many theories behind that. A popular theory suggests that Joseph Bruce, the chairman and managing director of White Star Line, the company that manufactured the Titanic, influenced Captain Smith and pressured him that the speed of the ship be maintained. There was tremendous pressure from the company that the ship had to complete its first voyage in 6 days so that a record could be broken, so that they could show that the Titanic was not only the biggest, the most expensive ship, but the fastest ship as well. A specific incident happened on the 14th of April at 2 p.m. when Captain Smith saw the ice warning and showed it to Joseph that they should reduce the speed because there is an ice warning. But Joseph stuffed the paper in his pocket so that the people and the crew members did not find out. He did not want the speed of the ship to slow down. This one disaster changed this industry worldwide forever. Many new regulations and standards were set up to avoid such disasters in the future. Today, so many years later, after the ship sank, environment has started to erode the ship lying underwater. The actual ship looked like this, and today, this is all that's left of it. It has been reported that bacteria and other organisms are eating away its metal framework. It is expected that by 2030, this ship would completely disintegrate underwater. Today, even after 110 years, the fascination regarding Titanic still remains in the minds of people.